All right, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about where do you go for wisdom? If you're someone who's in the middle of a losing season, or maybe you've experienced losing seasons in the past, it can often be hard to know where you should go to look for wisdom, to know what to do next in the middle of those seasons. And so on today's episode, we're going to talk through our own stories of how we found wisdom. And we hope by the end of it, you get some practical steps that you can take to find wisdom. All right. Welcome to the Four Lake Norman podcast. This episode, I'm joined by Anson Hamberry, our lead pastor, and Janelle Venters, our children's minister. So excited to have you guys on. And we're going to continue talking through the story of Job, because that's the current sermon series we're in at our church, Lake Norman Baptist. And we're a church that exists to bring healing, connection, and purpose to people all around Lake Norman through the love of Jesus. And often that comes through the sermon series that we're in and what we're learning out of those. And so we like to share what we're learning in these podcasts. And so you've already heard, but today we're going to talk about where you go for wisdom, which in today's world, I think is such a crucial question. And a lot of people are going to the wrong places for wisdom. And so I think this is a crucial conversation. So kind of tell us how you landed on that question and where that came from, the story of Job.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, we're going through this series where we're studying the Old Testament book of Job, which is a big Old Testament book.
Yeah.
So it's a long one, and it's a heavy one, to be real honest. And so, Job is one. It's actually where we got the idea of the losing seasons.
Mhm.
So, he's going through a losing season of literally biblical proportions, right? Dying for wisdom, how to process what's going on, trying to make sense of life. And so most of the book of Job is this interaction between Job and his friends, just processing all this loss. But one thing I learned, you talk about, we're always learning, as studying through this Old Testament book, in the middle of all that angst and trying to figure out life and processing the grief and loss and everything, we have this one chapter where it's this voice of wisdom. It's very much like an intermission, in a play, or a halftime in a game. It's like, all right, we're playing the game. We're seeing how it's all playing out. In this case, the home team's getting the crap beat out of them, like it's just, it's not going well. And we have this sort of voice of wisdom that's inserted into the book that's like, helping us, the reader, ask a better question. Like, where do you go for wisdom? If I were in this story, where would I go for wisdom? Where should Job and his friends go for wisdom? And so, as I think the analogies for that and the points of application for life, can be a ton. Like, when we all go through seasons, we're in the middle of things where we got a lot of questions and things, where do you find wisdom for those things? And I think, I want to talk about some things like daily. Like, I think there's some things that we can do that can be helpful for us just in the day-to-day, either work or home or whatever it is. How can we have a little time out, for wisdom for our day? But then also in bigger seasons of life, we're processing maybe a major decision or a season of loss. Maybe we've lost a loved one or career or possessions, whatever it might be. How do we find wisdom to keep going in seasons of life like that? So I think Job is an example for us, not only of somebody who has gone through really, really difficult season of life, but as a book, as a piece of literature, I think this idea that in the midst of it, we can pause and seek wisdom
Mm-hmm.
is a bit of wisdom for us.
Yeah.
That we can do that. And so what might that look like,
Yeah.
for us in life?
Yeah, and you bring up the sports component, and I think if you're really into football, you'll hear, the commentators talk about this sometimes, but each team comes into a game with a script of plays that they want to run in the first drive, first couple
Yeah.
drives. So it's like, usually 12 to 13 plays that they have that it's like, okay, here's how our first couple possessions are going to go. But sometimes these teams, they come out with the script and then it's like, oh, we just went 3 and out and we got punched in the mouth. Like, what, what are
Yeah.
we going to do now?
Yeah.
And that's where, a good timeout or, they make halftime adjustments and they have to figure it out. But I think that's true for a lot of us in life. Like a lot of us think we have like this script for how our lives are going to go. And then life punches us in the mouth and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, what do we do here? How can we make some adjustments, at halftime? And that's where the question of where do we go to make those adjustments or learn how to wisely make those
Mhm.
adjustments is a crucial question.
Percent agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, what comes to mind for you? Just even
Just at the
raising
top
this
of my
topic.
yeah, the top of my mind, I mean, one of the things that I think helps and helped me in some of the hardest pieces of my life is, building that spiritual muscle. And, my daily devotion time and my time in the Word has helped me to memorize the things that I will be drawn back to by the Spirit. Words of wisdom, songs that I've heard, worship songs that I've heard specifically. And we were talking even earlier today about that song by Shane and Shane, still I will worship, though you slay me, and which comes straight from Job, the
Does.
passage. But when I go back in the hardest seasons of my life, it's the truth that I have been taught as a child, the truth that I cling to. I have to go back and repeat to myself. So that's one of my, I think, disciplines that helps me to do that on the preparation side of it. But then also mentorships. I have a very close group of ladies that are both upstream and downstream in my life that will speak truth into me when I'm ignoring it or not listening to it. And I think those relationships are places where we have to get vulnerable sometimes, but being willing to step into those relationships and both give wisdom and receive wisdom is a serious place that I draw comfort from. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. Let's start with the daily, and then we'll pivot to sort of the bigger, life
Yeah.
questions. And first, I think might be helpful just to go, all right, what is wisdom? Like, what are we talking about
Yeah.
when we talk about
Yeah.
wisdom? And, various definitions, but I think one of the simplest is it's different than knowledge, right? Knowledge is the stuff that you know, and wisdom is how to put that stuff into practice, like how to put knowledge into use that's good, right, and appropriate. And so how do we, it's not just about knowing a lot of stuff. It's how do you put it to use? So it's a very practical word in that way, and insights and all those things. So how do we gain wisdom on the daily? Two things that I've come across over in recent years sort of pop to mind. One, around Pete Scazzaro, pretty frequently. And so he's sort of he's a pastor, retired pastor, but sort of a spiritual mentor, spiritual guru, if you will, and he talks about sort of creating moments or rhythms of the day where you just, all right, intentionally get out of the whirlwind of the day, and sort of the more consistent they can be, the more meaningful they become. And so for him, he talks about sort of 3 times a day. If I can just do it once, I feel pretty good. Like, let's focus on the one in the middle of the day, but like a midday pause where, okay, you just sort of stop. And it's not like, yeah, there's the lunch break, but you're eating lunch on that break, right? But it's something that's just specific to be quiet for a minute, practice silence, and just kind of let the noise settle down. So there was a season in my life, like everything, my application of wisdom goes up and down, and so some seasons are more consistent than others. But for one of the more consistent seasons, I had a time and a place where I could go, and I knew it was going to be quiet. Chances of people crossing my path were low. For the most part, I could be by myself, and I would just learn to sit in the quiet and do my best to try and let the noise in my head settle down. And to do that, I would focus on like one sentence prayer, just like, Lord, give me wisdom, would be one example, and just kind of almost like a mantra in my head, to keep my mind from wandering all over the place. Because inevitably, like just the daily stresses, I don't know about you, but like for me, like just the motor gets churning, and trying to sort of let that motor settle down to get some perspective. And one of the things that Pete Scazzaro talks about doing is placing some of those pauses like before a meeting or before a conversation that we know is going to have some weight to it. Yeah. It's like before you go rushing from one thing into the next, you got your calendar of things, like actually building into the calendar. You know what I'm going to need, even if it's 5 minutes before this next event on my calendar, to just sort of pause.
Yeah.
And get a little perspective, get a little wisdom. In the sort of the secular space, Juliet Funt is sort of a leadership voice. Heard her in a podcast not too long ago, and she talks about the wedge. And it's like, imagine this, like squeezing a wedge into your day, into your calendar, to just carve out some space to breathe.
Right.
She calls it, give me a minute to think.
Yeah.
But we need these pauses, these wedges, these moments in our day to think for a minute, to listen for a minute, to seek wisdom. And I think on kind of a micro level of application, I think that's kind of what we get out of the book of Job. It's kind of like this wedge into the story of Job. And it's not a huge wedge. It's just this moment of, let's get a little perspective here.
Yeah.
So if we can have some of those moments of perspective during the day, lots of things we could do with it. But I think even just at its most basic level, if we stop simply to ask for wisdom, if we believe that there is a God who hears our prayers, even if we have just a little bit of faith, just to go, all right, God, if you're up there, I need some wisdom right now. And I got 3 minutes to just wait for it. And I think even just in that, like, it can make a difference in kind of even if it doesn't change the circumstances around us, it can change us in the way that we apply that. So that's kind of what rolls around in my head. I'd be curious as you guys think about, what do you need for daily wisdom?
Yeah. That is very interesting, because I didn't even realize that I should be doing that, but there was a job transition that I was looking at several years ago. This has been a little while ago, but I was super stressed about it, and my children were doing what they needed to be doing, and I took an afternoon off and went to Lake Norman, and remember the Eno phase that all of our kids went through. I put up a hammock, and I was off the beaten path. I was down by the lake, and I didn't take a phone. I didn't take a tablet. I didn't take anything at all. I took my Bible. But I sat in the hammock, and I just looked up at the trees and looked at the lake. And it was probably about an hour of just silence and solitude. And as I'm sitting there, like, scripture passages just came to mind, not prompted by anything except a squirrel and a nut falling from a tree, but it was it was a pause so that I could breathe again and take the anxiety down. And it was it was so meaningful that it's one of those moments that I go back to and think about, and like, oh, I need to do that again. But yeah.
Yeah, I think what comes to my mind, maybe not all of this is daily practices, but there was a book I read called The Wisdom Pyramid, and pretty much you're familiar with the food pyramid, right? That we all learned in like health class or whatever. So it's like, you got to have, the most of this thing, and then they get smaller as you go to the top. But the most important things are usually the biggest pieces of the pyramid. And so the author is, saying there's a lot of different ways we can gain wisdom in our world, but the proportion of how we do that should matter a lot and versus where we go. So I think of a time in my life where I was in a kind of a career crossroads, and I guess my losing season, you could say, is I lost my sense of purpose, and I was wrestling with, like, what does what am I here on this earth for?
Yeah.
Like, what am I created to do? Um, and it didn't feel like the current job I was in lined up with that. But I tried to be patient in it, and I went through the season of just searching for wisdom on that. And I did it a couple different ways. Obviously, I had my spiritual disciplines of reading the scriptures and spending time in prayer. And I had actually stepped down from my ministry position and taken a sales job and in commercial flooring of all things.
It's where you go for wisdom.
Yeah.
Get
But
grounded.
I remember, I would take as part of my lunch break, I would eat fast so then I could go out for like a 30-minute walk with no phone, no headphones, no anything. And I would just pray and listen. And that was really formative. I had there was people connected to our church that I reached out to pick their brain on, like, hey, you've been really successful. You're in this leadership position. What can you share with me about kind of where I'm at? That was really helpful. There were books recommended to me that I read. And then I also, we're on YouTube right now. I would go to YouTube and watch videos and learn, how to do, certain things. But I think the proportion of which I was doing that was what helped me the most. So reading the Bible, listening to God in that way, and spending that time in prayer on those walks were probably the most formative, which in the book, ironically, is the biggest piece of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And then the second biggest piece was, leaning on your community. And, that author argues it should be the church. And that's where you get that wisdom from. And that was true for me. And then, another piece of the pyramid there is like through art and beauty, which I found that in my own life. Like there's lyrics of songs that speak to me that I feel like I gain wisdom from. And then the smallest piece at the very top is like media and our phones and the internet, right? But oftentimes we make that the biggest
Yeah.
piece, but it does play a role. It's just,
Yeah.
we got to have it in the right, kind of framework. And through that season, the Lord opened my eyes to really understand myself better and to give me wisdom on, where do I feel like I'm most needed vocationally in this world?
Yeah.
It's wired you to
Yeah.
meet needs of the world.
Yeah. But it took some time. It didn't happen overnight, and it was just waiting on the Lord to give me that wisdom. But, the scriptures tell us that if we ask for it, he will give it to us.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just have to wait on it a little.
Timing. His timing is perfect. It's not as fast as I would like for it to be sometimes. I am impatient at all times.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. You talk about waiting, and I agree. I mean, we have to be patient. Nothing. We always want everything to change right away.
Instant gratification.
And so I think it's part of how we learn and grow, and certainly to trust in God is to wait, because he's not sort of a genie in the lamp, that you rub the lamp and God fixes everything. It's just not, it's not life. It's not realistic. But yet it's what we want, right? It's what we long for. At the same time, one of the things I've learned, and I'd be curious you guys take on this, one of the reasons I think we don't pause and seek wisdom is because we don't really think it's going to make a difference. Like we think, hey, I need to spend my time trying to figure it out. Like especially if it's something that's like you're really wrestling with something, right? Or trying to I need to take whatever time I have to Google this, and figure out the diagnosis or figure out what every expert has to say on it, right? So we sort of we think that we got to spend every ounce of our energy trying to solve the problem, because we don't really think pausing to seek wisdom is going to make a difference. I mean, I think we wouldn't say that out loud, but just, our actions sometimes betray our thoughts. And heavens, I wish I were much more consistent in first pausing. But what I have learned is when I do use that wedge idea and squeeze it in there, more often than not, like God will bring clarity pretty quickly. And it may not resolve a situation, but I've been surprised at just sitting down for 3, 4, 5 minutes. There's a spot in my backyard where I've sort of set up a little, little bench that kind of looks out into the woods. And this is actually a great time of year because the leaves are starting to fall.
Yeah.
You know, so I can watch the leaves fall. And I've been amazed sometimes at how quickly thought will come into my mind. And I'm going to choose to believe that's the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, and it'll sort of just shift my perspective.
Mhm.
And for somebody who's,
Mm.
you know, hearing us talk and they're like, yeah, that sounds good, you know, whatever, hyper spiritual people, you know, no, I think God does meet us. I just think it's part of the kindness of God to just trust and wait. And we're not listening for the, you know, some great big new revelation, right? But I think very often that thought that pops into your mind is from the Holy Spirit and can meaningfully shift our perspective on things. And at least what I've found is more often than not, I'll walk away surprised, like, wow, like that actually came pretty quickly.
Mm.
It doesn't take a huge, like, it didn't take all day. Just the power of a little small moment to just listen, you know, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious what you guys have found, but
Mhm.
Would say I have, I use this phrase quite a bit. Too often I panic before I pray, and it should be reversed and switched. I also think that we are fed a lot of information. I mean, we have a self-help section in every library, every bookstore. That is the driven, you know, you can fix it if you read this book. And, you know, there is a book that can help us fix it, but it's teaching us the way of wisdom,
Yeah.
which we actually have a Bible study happening right now at the church called The Way of Wisdom, where we're studying Proverbs with the women's ministry on Tuesday morning. If you're in the area and you wanna join
Students
us.
too are doing
Students are doing
Proverbs.
wisdom all over the place.
wisdom
Yeah.
everywhere. What a
We need to learn.
it's almost like he has planned that, right?
Yeah.
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 Ways to learn, ways
Yeah.
to learn, and ways to be
Yeah.
in community together so that you can share each other's experiences. There's a lot of people around those Bible study tables or those tables at the coffee shop where you are in a relationship with people and you're kind of sharing life stories, and you can learn from people who have had those same experiences as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
Yeah.
LNBC.com.
Yeah.
Groups.
Yeah. Come join us. Yeah, I've been reading First Corinthians lately and trying to study it a little deeper than I normally do, and you know, like kind of my devotional
Yeah.
time, I guess you can call it. And it's interesting. So the people in Corinth or the church in Corinth that Paul is writing to are very puffed up, arrogant. By the world standards, they look very wise. You know, their speech is very, I don't know what the right word is, polished, I guess. And, you know, they have the ability to pose as wise. And Paul just like cuts them at the knees and says, the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God, and the wisdom of God is foolishness to the world. And that's it when I think it's chapter 2, Paul says we preach Christ crucified. So he's taking specifically Christ on the cross as a piece of the gospel to communicate to them, because that's the part of the gospel they needed to hear most of. You think you have all these spiritual gifts and you think you're so in tune with the Spirit, but in reality, like, you're missing the point, because they had all these disagreements. They weren't loving their neighbors well. Um, they were claiming to have the Spirit speaking to them things, you know, and acting like they had a special line, direct line to God. Um, and Paul just undercuts that by saying Jesus gave himself up on behalf of other people and did not puff himself up. He humbled himself to the point of death on a cross. And that should change the way that we think about wisdom. That looks like foolishness for the Messiah, the King, to be killed on a cross in that way. Looks foolish to the world. But in reality, that's how God has radically changed the world and changed our lives. And so it's actually the most wise thing God could have done. And so I think what Paul really emphasizes to the church in Corinth is that wisdom only comes by the Spirit, because it's different from the wisdom of the world. All of us can find the wisdom of the world in 2 seconds with AI and with Google and, you know, YouTube and all the things. But the wisdom that comes from the Spirit is different, and it's going to look foolish to the world. Like, the journey I went on discovering my purpose, I feel like people were, you know, thought it was kind of silly, just the journey I went on. Um, but it was what I needed most. And God grew me more in that season of my life than I had at any other point, before that. And I felt like what I was growing in was wisdom, and it came from the Spirit. And so, I think that's something that popped in my head too when you were talking is, and what you're saying is we need to hold space in our days to wait on the Spirit to intervene and give us that wisdom.
Mhm.
And I think he does meet us in that moment because he wants to be in relationship with us, and
Yeah.
he loves us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's a really good practical.
Yeah. And I think, sort of, we've been talking about kind of daily, some practices of putting a little wedge in the day to just ask the question, hey, where is wisdom for me today? And so whether it's 5 minutes in a day or zoom out to like a bigger question in life, maybe there's, 5 days that we need to spend, asking the question, or sometimes it's 5 years of holding open this question, like, God, give me wisdom.
Mhm.
As we're talking, I find myself thinking about the direction of that sort of wedge, right? And if it's sort of this, maybe switch the analogy to a funnel, like what's coming into the funnel and what direction is that funnel placed,
Mhm.
And so if it's this way and it's directed upward, the visual is, all right, I need, if God's up there, right? Can you pour some things in the funnel,
Yeah.
as opposed to like directing it this way, or this way, but like whether it's 5 minutes in a day or a season, of something that's bigger. One of the things in the Bible too is, hey, we don't have because we don't ask. And I think just having enough faith to ask for wisdom and just a pause to do that,
Mhm.
I think can be powerful and transformative. And kind of coming back to the structure of Job, I think we're given this structure in this, Old Testament book of like, hey, look at that. God kind of dropped a little pause in the middle of the story to help us see some wisdom and process what's going on. So the more I think we do that, the more wisdom we're inviting God to pour into our lives, and
Yeah.
we all need it.
Yeah. We would love to see, everybody in Lake Norman growing in wisdom.
That'd be a good thing for a community, right?
Yeah.
To be growing in wisdom,
Yeah.
whether you're, whatever your background, whatever, wherever you come from, whatever you believe. Like, I think there is a shared community, that can be built around humility, seeking wisdom. And of course, as Christ followers, as Christians, we believe ultimately wisdom comes from God. And we want to see as many people as possible look to God, whatever church they go to, or
Yeah.
whatever their family dynamic is like, and all the, whatever your background is. We believe that's where wisdom is found. And so, yeah, the more that can be true in our community.
Absolutely. So, yeah, if you're in and around the Lake Norman area and you've stumbled across this podcast and you're in a season of searching for wisdom, we would love to come alongside you in that. So in the description, there's a link to our website. You can go there and find all the information about us. But we would love to have you join us in your search for wisdom so we can come alongside you and help. And thank you guys for taking the time to be on the show. We hope you walked away with some practical steps of how to search for wisdom, whether you're in a winning season or a losing season. It's always good to pause and wait for God to give you that wisdom. So we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we hope to see you next time.